writers, and welcome to episode 78 of BS with Writers. Today, I can't even tell you how excited. I got to talk to Kristan Higgins, who is a women's fiction author who also writes romance. She's one of the authors who I have always thought, like, wow, she's really figured it out. She's got it made. She's up there in my head, and honestly, on most of the bestseller lists as well, as an author who is just widely known, widely respected, really loved. Her words are authentic and real, and her characters are people you want to hang out with. She's one of my she's on a shelf. She's on a pedestal. Anyway, it was super fun getting to talk to her. I found her at the NINC conference in Florida, and when I found out she was there, was the most fangirly that I think I've been, and announced to her that we were going to be best friends, which we now are, of course. I'm still working on it, but I'm pretty sure she likes me a lot. So anyway, my awkwardness aside, I had a great chat with Kristan Higgins. And one of the things that we kind of talked about, and what I'd like this episode sort of to be about, aside from Kristan's potato famine era, which she will discuss, is kind of the nature of this business. If you've been publishing for a while, regardless of whether you are publishing traditionally or you are an indie author, you know that this business is tough. And in a lot of ways, it can feel like a treadmill, where you're plodding along. And I don't mean plotting with T's. I mean like slowly just walking, repeating yourself, doing the same things, getting nowhere. And I have definitely been a victim of the treadmill psyche for a while, off and on, here and there. I think comparisonitis is something that comes into play here, where we look at our peers with whom we started and wonder why they're doing well and we're not, or why so-and-so got this book deal and we didn't, or why this person's book got made into a movie and ours didn't. All of those things that just feel really disappointing, but also toxic, right? If you start really working through what your brain does as you look at these things and wonder and say, why not me? I think, I talked about it with Julia Jarrett in that episode, if you listen to it. But it can really create kind of a downward cycle. So that's one thing that I kind of wanted to talk about. And Kristan touches on something along those lines without being explicit about exactly what it was. But I mean, for one thing, you're not alone. I'll just throw that out there. We all, of course, have disappointments in our careers and high points as well, hopefully. But just hear that and know that this is hard. We're doing something hard that most people won't do. So take that and just kind of hold it close to your heart. The other thing that I wanted to talk about on a much more personal note is, you guys know that I have flipped genres here. I've not left romance, but I have started a new pen name. I am publishing as Nancy Stewart. I actually had 2 books come out in the last 2 weeks. One was the second in my small town cozy amateur sleuth series. It's called Bumped Off at the Bake Sale. And I really, really like that book, but that's the second in a series. And then the first in a new series, which is just in time for Halloween. It is a witchy, paranormal, midlife, magical, cozy mystery. It's set in a little vineyard in Northern California. The witches are sisters who are making wine, and they make wine for the special festivals that go along with a lot of the sort of moon phases. And so the first one, of course, is the All Hallows Eve Festival, or Samhain, depending on how you pronounce that. Anyway, so that came out yesterday. Yesterday? Yes, I don't know what day it is. Anyway, so that switch in genre, creation of a new identity in a way, has been part of what's been going on with me. But I think it's all symptomatic of something much bigger that I haven't kept it a secret, but I haven't shared it explicitly either. I lost both of my parents in an 18-month period in 2021 and 2023. So my mom died just a little over a year ago. And, through the process of that happening, I and we were a close family. I just have one brother, and we were very involved with our parents and their care. And I think I was very reactionary as it was all happening because there was shit to do, and that's who I am. And if it's fight or flight, I'm going to fight. And I buckle down. I take care of things. I'm the person you want when bad shit is going on. But I think I take care of things at my own peril. I sort of shove down what I might need to be thinking about or feeling in order to take care of things and make sure that, things get done properly and everyone else is taken care of. And that's who I am. So that's who I was through a lot of the last 2.5 years, really. I think I'm only just coming to terms with what it is to be an adult in the world with no family, or no close family. My parents were really important to me. And the point of me mentioning this is not to make you go, oh, that's so sad. It is sad. It's also just a reality of life. I'm a 51-year-old woman. My parents obviously could not be around forever. So it was bound to happen eventually. That said, it forced me to reevaluate a lot of things. For a while, I think I operated from a place of fear and hurt and sorrow, and I just kind of became robotic and did what I thought I was supposed to do. That translated into my publishing life. It translated into my editing life. And I think I let some people down. So I want to say I'm sorry if I did let you down during that time. I know that I did not do my best. And there were reasons for that I wasn't talking about. That said, what this means for me and for you potentially is that I'm going to shift. This is something that's been coming for a while. I have been doing a lot more coaching, story coaching, helping writers kind of figure out what the pieces are in the stories that they're putting together. And I love it. It has been fun. I think it is helpful. I've had a lot of really great feedback. I have some testimonials that I'm going to be putting up as I shift my website from word editing to story focus. I'm not going to be doing any more line edits or proofreads. I will for those for whom I'm booked, but it's very stressful to be booked a year out. And so I want to shift to more consulting and coaching and teaching because I miss the interaction. I miss the talking, and I love helping people figure out what needs to happen in their stories and talk through craft books and how story works and just where the industry is going and all the things. That's fun for me. And that's what I want to do. So I think what my parents' deaths taught me was that I don't have time to just do something because I think I'm supposed to do it. I'm going to focus on the things that I love, the things that bring me joy, the things that I think really help other people and bring them joy. And that's just how it has to be. And I highly recommend that if possible, you contemplate these things without having to suffer the deaths of both of your parents, because life is short and we're here for such a short amount of time. And it's really about the people and the connections that we make. And that's what I want to spend my time doing. So I'm going to write the things I want to write. I'm going to do the work I want to do. And I would love to do it with you. So part of that is having conversations with people like Kristan Higgins. And so I want to get on into that because I have a feeling that if you came here and you have not listened to one of these episodes before, you probably didn't come to hear Nancy talk about her existential crisis. You probably came because you like Kristan Higgins as much as I do. So let's roll into the interview. Just a quick reminder that you are listening to this episode. It is produced solely by Evident Inc. You can find me at my website, which is evidentinc.com. And there are courses and coaching and consulting available there. So thank you so much for listening. I will see you on the other side of the interview, but let's get to it. Welcome, Kristan Higgins, to BS with Writers. I am over the moon to talk to you today. You are, I'm sure you get this a lot, but you're one of my favorite authors. And I was so honored to meet you at NINC this year, and especially excited when you agreed to be my best friend and to come talk to me.
Yeah, no, it's been a beautiful nascent relationship. Yeah, new best friend for sure.
Yeah, I know. I'll stop. If you wouldn't mind, most people have at least heard of you, but can you give us just a quick little intro who you are?
Sure. I am the author of 24 books, which have been sold all around the world. I think more than 24 languages, and I don't know how many countries. I've been really lucky. All my books have been USA Today bestsellers. Some of them have been on the Times and the Wall Street Journal and all that good stuff. I've been writing since my son was 3, so he is 25 now. That's always how I measure it. When my son was in nursery school, I started writing.
Well, so can we talk? We'll go back to that whole every single book I've written was a bestseller thing in just a second.
Yeah, there's a story behind it. For sure. I'm glad we'll go back to it.
Okay, good. But talk a little bit about that first book, about how did you decide that you were a writer? Did you know you were a writer? How did you come into this career?
I didn't know that I would write books, but I did always love reading and writing. So I was an English major in college. I wanted to be a doctor, just because I love kids, and I thought I'll be a pediatric surgeon, and then I was terrible at math and science, so I figured maybe swerve. And I loved writing papers and reading 700 pages a week. I'm like, this is what I have to do. This is awesome. And then my first job out of college was as a copywriter. And so I was a copywriter for a number of years, I guess like 7. And I wrote everything from like tampon commercials to obituaries. I think that's a pretty broad spectrum.
Yeah.
I worked in advertising, consulting, and mostly my jobs were writing. But I never thought about fiction until I was home with my kids, and we live in a kind of a rural area in Connecticut, and we don't have any visible neighbors, and there were no other children in the neighborhood, and I was lonely, and I found myself, reading romance novels, and then if I really liked them, I'd want them to go on, so I'd sort of make up extra chapters in my head, and then one day I thought, maybe I could write a book, an actual book. I had never tried to write fiction before, except for I think I had one assignment in college, even though I was an English major. We didn't do creative writing. And we just did analytical writing. Like, what are your feelings about what someone else wrote? And so I thought I'd write a historical romance because I love to read those. And my husband's Irish, so I thought I'd set it in Ireland. And what came out was like this dark, sad love story about, an Irish Protestant, an Irish woman with a huge family just after the potato famine, and this Protestant duke who falls in love with her, and like somebody gets tuberculosis and someone's in prison. Exactly what you expect when you think of me,
Your
right?
typical Kristan Higgins novel, yeah.
I know, it's like the Poe-fam era of historical romance, really neglected. So I thought I'd fill that hole. But it did get me to think like, well, how does a person get published? So I Googled, how do you get published? And there was an RWA conference, Romance Writers of America, had a New England conference like 2 weeks in the future. And I was like, oh, honey, I'm going to go to this. It's the first time I'd left my kids. And I went to this conference, and there were about 100 people there. Suzanne Brockman was the keynote speaker. Barbara O'Neill was another keynoter. And one of them in their keynote said, this was before indie publishing. So one of them said only 1 in 100 of you will get a contract, or yeah, 1 in 100 will get published. And I was like, oh, that's horrible news, And then like one in 100 of those will become a best-selling author. I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. What have I done? But I also thought, how can I be that 1 in 100? And I looked around and I'm like, I'm not more talented than the people here. I'm not more creative. I'm certainly not more experienced. So what do I have going for me? And I thought, well, I've got a Yankee work ethic and a background in advertising, writing on deadline, writing bright copy that people want to read. And, let's see where it goes. I also thought at the time, I had written my POFAM romance. My heroine was extremely beautiful and my hero was extremely handsome and wealthy. And I thought, what about regular people? Don't we get stories too? And at the time, the answer was kind of no. It was Sex and the City era, Twilight, and it didn't seem like, normal people got romances, and they all lived in Manhattan or California or Texas on a huge ranch. And I thought, well, I don't live in any of this. I live in a tiny little town, so let me write a small town romance. Write what you know. And
Yeah.
so I did, and that was my first completed manuscript, and it was picked up by Harlequin, and I got a multi-book deal, and I've been under contract since last fall when I took a little break.
Well, was there an agent in there somewhere, or did you
Yes.
directly submit?
I got an agent. That's another thing that conference taught me, was get an agent. Your life will be a lot easier. So I
You made
did
that
get an
sound really
agent.
easy. I got an agent.
I wrote to the slush pile. So at first I was writing, the full page, 8.5 by 11 cover letter and a synopsis in the first 3 chapters. And I just recently found my rejection folder, because we never throw that stuff out, us writers.
Right.
We want to remember who rejected us. So, I kept getting rejected, and I thought, I don't think a lot of this stuff is even being read, because you get like this crooked photocopied rejection, dear author. So I thought, let me change up my approach, and I just started emailing agents with a very brief elevator pitch, which I later learned was the term. And I said, I'm an award-winning copywriter. I'm the mother of 2 young children and married to a heroic firefighter. And if you want to hear more, here's my contact info. So I did start getting requests for that. And the first agent who read the full book represented me. She became my agent for 17, 18 books.
And you switched agents at some point?
I did, yeah. My agent semi-retired, and I wanted to see what another agency could do with like film and television rights and that kind of thing. And so I did make a move about 3 years ago.
Okay, we'll come back to film and television, but now we have to talk about, you kind of have the career that I was told I would have to pursue when I was growing up. I was also an English major. I did not think being a writer was a feasible way to make a living or anything. That I thought it was a dream as well. But your story is much more linear, and that is, I would say, more typical of a trad author, except that then you went on to say that every single book you've published has hit a bestseller list. So let's talk about that.
Well, not at first. So my first book, let's say that it was a mass market paperback from a new division at Harlequin. Gosh, I've just forgotten the name of it. I should grab a book, but it was single title romance, not category romance, and not women's fiction. And so that was, I think, generously we could say it was a sleeper hit, in that I got a lot of lovely fan mail, and Um, and it didn't hit any bestsellers then, but it did go back to get a second printing.
Okay.
My next book was also a sleeper hit, but it won the Rita Award.
Mhm.
So when writers start reading you, um, there's this wonderful ripple effect. You know, all writers are readers, and so when you get an author who loves your book and talks about it, your career immediately gets like this injection of adrenaline, and that's what started to happen. Um, my my fourth book was one of the best-selling books in the country in Kindle, you know, in that format, digital format. I remember seeing the list and thinking like, oh, there's been a huge mistake because I was right below the girl with the dragon tattoo and right above Nora Roberts. And
What?
I was like, no,
Yeah.
no, there must be something wrong.
Oh, that's
But
great.
so then, as my romances got more popular, I did start hitting the NYT back when it had 25 spots, and then my publisher would reissue some of the earlier books, and that's when they'd hit the USA Today list or something like that.
I see.
Um, and then you build a reputation, and I was very productive. As I said, I have that Yankee work ethic, and I took my job very seriously. Not myself, but my job, in that I wrote a book a year or more, which to the indie audience is like, you wrote a book a year, I write a book a month, and but in traditional, a book a year is like the minimum.
Mhm.
Uh, and I really wanted each of my books to be excellent and not the same as the last one. Um, which is not to say that like having your own formula isn't a completely legitimate way to keep a beloved, keep that mojo going. I know like authors who write, a lot of the same rhythm and formula and humor and whatnot, and they have empires,
Yeah.
so I'm not saying that's something you shouldn't do. It works for a lot of authors. I didn't want to write that way. So I never knew what I would write next. I'd finish a book and be like, okay, what's the next one going to be about? And spend, like a month wondering and worrying. I have nothing left. I'm not creative anymore. What'll I do? I'll have to give back my advance, all the worries that we traditional authors have. And then something would come to me, and, I'd crank it out.
So what does crank it out look like for you? Do you plot
So
it out? Do you just sit down and go somewhere in between?
I like to think about my books before I commit to writing them. So I'll need to know a little bit about, what if you were a person who, that's how all my books start. What if you were a person who fill in the blank? And I get the idea from everywhere, from like a girl who's having a meltdown on the phone with the guy who just broke up with her on the train. That was one of my book ideas. Or something a documentary I saw when I was watching some medical documentary, and it was about a person with a terminal illness, and I thought, oh, well, how would you live your life if you knew
How
it was
romantic.
right? If you knew it was going to be so short. It's actually
Yeah.
Pack Up the Moon, and that's probably the most romantic book I've written, I think, because it's such a beautiful love story.
Well, and you talked a little bit about that one being a little bit outside of your usual when I saw you speak in Florida.
Mm.
I don't want to ruin the ending, but I am curious. Maybe we don't publish this part, but does one of your characters, your main characters, actually die of a terminal illness?
Yeah, she dies in chapter 2. So it's not a mystery. The
Okay.
story is a young widower. He's on the spectrum. He works by himself, and he falls in love with this bubbly opposites attract woman, and they have this magical courtship and romance and get married, and then they discover that she has a terminal lung disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And it took me a long time to find a disease that is incurable that could hit a young person,
Yeah.
where you would not be as disabled by the disease as you might be with, say, brain cancer, or you would basically just have difficulty breathing and be very tired.
Yeah.
And so she knows she's going to die, and that there's a projected 3 to 5 years kind of thing. And so she also knows her husband is going to be lost without her. So she writes him a letter for every month of the first year of his widowhood, giving him something to do, like an instruction. This month, I want you to, and like the first month, it's go to the grocery store. Because if I know you, there's vegetables rotting in the vegetable drawer and you're eating peanut butter. And he's so excited to like be hearing from her again that it does
Yeah.
kind of get him out into the world. And each month it becomes a little harder. The job becomes a little bigger. And she guides him through that year. And I think it's incredibly romantic, if sad. But her point of view story is told backwards. So we
Right.
go from her being sick. It's an epistolary novel, which means it's about letter
Written in
writing.
letters.
She writes to
Yeah.
her dad, who has passed away, and she knows like her time is drawing to an end. She's like, I feel it, it's coming. And then her next chapter is like 6 months before that. And we go backwards to the day that she met her husband and thought, I've met the man I'm going to marry. And I did that so that the reader would be left with her story ending at the beginning.
Yeah.
So that it wouldn't feel so sad, because if you didn't know she was going to die, I think it would just be too heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is when I saw you in Florida, I will admit I hadn't read a million of your novels. I'd read 2 or 3. And I never categorized you in my head as a romance author
Mm-hmm.
based on the definitions I have learned as a romance author.
Right.
Because, and I haven't read that book, but I wouldn't classify that as a romance. Would
It's
you?
not. It's
Okay.
definitely not. Yeah.
Fair.
It's definitely women's fiction. And I shifted into women's fiction just because it was, I was kind of leaning that way. Even my earlier romances, they all have elements of women's fiction in that it's about the journey of the woman.
Yeah.
My first 6 books were told in first person, first 5, because I didn't know you weren't supposed to do that in romance. And that's one of the bits of advice I have for your listeners is don't worry about what the rules are. The only rule is write a really good book. And if it's a romance, it's not a romance unless it ends happily with the couple together. And
Exactly.
so I was kind of swinging into some other issues with, the heroine's past and like the trauma of her mother leaving on her 13th birthday and she never seeing her again. And my publisher said, why don't you write women's fiction? And I said, okay, So my first women's fiction novel was If You Only Knew. And I loved writing that. It's about 2 sisters. One is the mother of triplets. One is recently divorced and a wedding dress designer, which justified me watching thousands of hours of Say Yes to the Dress.
I want to say that's the first book I read from you, actually.
Okay.
So that's probably why I didn't classify you in my mind as a romance author.
Yeah.
But so and I'm not trying to put you in a box by any means. Where do you put yourself? Are you women's fiction at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to I'd love it if we could just say I write novels. I'm a fiction writer, but
yeah.
And I, like in Pack Up the Moon, the protagonist narrator is mostly Joshua. So it's not really women's fiction. It's, man's fiction.
There is no such thing, though.
Lad lit,
Yeah. Lad lit? Is that what you just said? Why don't we have that?
I know. But getting back to my process, I do that what if idea, and I kick that around for a while. I always turn to Disney as an example of, what if you were a person who and like encountered this situation? And then my next question is, who would be the worst person for this job, for this situation? So to go back to Pack Up the Moon, the worst person to be a widower is a man on the spectrum who has trouble connecting with people, works for himself, and doesn't really have any friends outside of his childhood next door neighbors who are a generation older than he is. Um, and I go from there because I think that it makes it more interesting for the reader if our hero or heroine is ill-equipped to deal with the situation. If
Yeah.
you're like, I've got this. If the widower was like a funeral director, it'd be easier for him. He deals with death all the time, right? He knows
Yeah.
what people experience and sees grief up close all the time. So I pick that ill-equipped person, and I like an outline. I like certainly the 3-act structure. I like to know how it will end,
Yeah.
and who the main characters are. And then I start writing. And
Do you usually know who the dog is before you begin?
you know what? I do. And, it's not a gimmick that I have dogs in my book. I've always had a dog, and I'm getting a dog soon. My beloved Luther died this summer, and I had to have some time to grieve. And,
Yeah.
but after Christmas, we'll be getting another dog. And I think I did one book where the heroine had a cat, and another book where the heroine had cats, but they weren't as important as dogs. But to me, the choice of your pet says a lot about you. Um, why this dog? What personality traits does this dog have? Where did you find the dog? Um, why did this dog speak to you? How do you relate to that dog? And so that's really fun. But I let my readers name the dog, and if
Always?
pretty much, yeah, I
Oh, that's
say,
cool.
it's time to pick the dog, and I put it out there, and I get thousands of people saying, use my dog, and if I pick their dog, I donate to their local animal shelter.
Oh,
Just
that's neat.
fun thing to do.
Well, and that kind of that segues nicely, I think, into something that I learned about you and also observed, and that's that you are good at social media, or have people that are good at social media. Um,
Yeah, I
and
like. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, obviously, that kind of evolved during the course of your career, because in 1999, I don't. Did we have Facebook? Maybe. No, probably not, because we didn't even have the
Yeah,
internet yet.
when I
Really.
when I got published, I think it was 2004 that I signed with HQN. That's the name of the division. I can't believe it slipped out of my mind. They said, we would like you to have a website. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. My accountant made a website. My husband's accountant friend was like, oh, yeah, I can help you with that. There was no Wix. There was no,
Yeah,
Squarespace. Um, and then I did get on social media reluctantly because I thought, as a human, I don't like social media. I like to see, my nephew or, my cousin's kids going to school on the first day. But otherwise, I think of it as a real black hole of wasting time. And I just discovered Facebook Reels, and now my life is over because I'm just
I
watching
know.
soldiers reunite with their dogs. And you know,
I watched those ones too. My husband was military, so any like
yeah,
deployment
yeah,
homecoming, I'm like, oh,
yeah. My son too. He's in the military, but um, uh, so one of the things I thought, and this is like a lesson from high school or something, you can only be yourself. If you're introverted and shy and awkward, be that on social media. Don't pretend to be confident and sassy and, always with the quick lines and sassy comebacks. So I thought, well, I can only be myself. And it resonated, in that I'm a mom first, a wife second, and that I have a very happy, normal life. I'm happily married. I love my sister. I see my mom almost every day. And that, I think that kind of connection really at the time spoke to people. And having had a few books out in the marketplace, the response was sort of like, you're just like your books. And so it was kind of continuity of message.
Yeah.
And it was very organic, it was just me. Like I remember the first time I posted like a messy hair picture because it was just like I looked so goofy, and I'm like, I'm gonna post this because I have nothing else going on today,
Yeah.
and walk the kids to the school bus, and then maybe put something in the crock pot and write for a few hours. That's my life,
Yeah.
and that messy hair picture just made people love that I would post that I wasn't like trying to be glam and pretty, and this is how I
Wow.
look in the morning. So that I think that really struck a chord, and it helps to have it's a huge. I wouldn't be a best-selling author or an author at all if I didn't have readers. So if readers feel like they know you and that you're grateful for them and you interact with them, um, it's only good for your career, but it's also so rewarding, when someone says like, "Oh, I just started following you and I love you." And it's just like, oh, wow,
Yeah.
that's so great. Um, yeah. And so as my career grew, um, I have a wonderful assistant, and I feel like that's such a wrong title for her. Oh, she's like my almost my partner in marketing and stuff. And
Yeah.
she will we share a folder that we upload stuff that I would post, and she'll schedule it. Sometimes she'll find content for me, and so on the days when I have nothing, or uh if I'm going to be away, she'll post things for me. Um, and this is after we worked together for like 8 years. I was very wary of letting somebody else have access to my page. I had done it all myself, and but it was becoming like a third of my day was responding to social media, and I thought like I can't do this if I want to still write books.
Yeah.
And you know how it is, like now there's, first there was Facebook, and then Twitter, and then Instagram, and then, TikTok and YouTube channel and all this stuff. And it just becomes overwhelming.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Mel Jolly and I go way back, and she's fantastic. And I do have one page, I call it my super readers page. You have to sort of apply to be a super reader and answer some questions, so we verify that you're human. And right, I think I have about 5,500 people on there now. And that page I do only myself. That's just
Yeah.
me chatting with my readers. Um and then I have another public page, and that's a combination of, post some funny meme that will entertain people and they'll share, and
Yeah.
then post your personal stuff too,
Yeah. I think a lot of authors struggle with that drive to be authentic versus how to put forth a brand
Right.
that matches what they're trying to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I sometimes I think that it even affects the voice of your novels when you're trying to be a brand, as opposed to just writing it as yourself. I think it takes me years to learn every single lesson, and usually I have to learn the lesson 3 or 4 times before it takes hold.
Yeah.
And I think that was one that I probably published 10 books before I realized that they were not by me. They were
Right.
by the Delancey Stewart I was trying to be.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
until I accepted that I write rom-com, I write humor, I can't help it.
Yeah.
Um, that's where things started to turn around a little bit.
Right.
People
Right.
started
And
to respond.
if you think of your books as an extension of your personality, like if you're a funny person, your humor is going to come out. and you can't force yourself to be very serious and somber and thoughtful if you are spontaneous and goofy. And, so don't try to be like your friend who's this way. And, if you're I was saying this at the NINC conference, it's completely okay to be an introverted person who's uncomfortable with social media or crowds or conferences, because you'll speak to so many people who are exactly like that.
Yeah.
And, your tagline could be like a shy person writing sassy heroines or something like that. You don't have to be anything but who you are.
Yeah.
And in the writing too, early in my career, my agent represented Cindy Gerard, who was a smoking hot romantic suspense author at the time. And I said, very hesitantly, because I didn't want to bother her, but we were being taken out to dinner by our agent. I said, Cindy, do you have any advice for a new author like myself? And she said, yes, I do. Keep your head down and do your thing. That's don't listen to what the market wants or who's like soaring to the top of the lists or who got a contract or who just sold 10,000 books in a week on, don't listen to them. That's just going to mess with your voice
Yeah.
and what you want to write. And the market changes so quickly that if you say, okay, quick, let me write an Emily Henry kind of rom-com where the heroine's in publishing, by the time you finish that, the trend is over.
Yeah.
And there's already an Emily Henry. So don't try to be her, be yourself, So that was fantastic advice. And I use it to this day of keep your head down, do your thing, write sincerely, write authentically. And, in writing women's fiction, I like to tackle difficult topics, um, like terminal illness, or one of my books was about women and our relationship with weight and size and the American obsession with it and food,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
Um, and I've written a book where a woman suffers a brutal assault and is trying to get on with the rest of her life while still acknowledging that happened and dealing with PTSD and stuff like that. But all my books have my voice.
Yeah.
Um, all my characters are emotionally honest. They're all funny in some respects. They can be like funny and brokenhearted in the same sentence, and they all want to do better. So that's really important to me, to have a character who doesn't just want a guy or a promotion or a house or something. They want to be someone who deserves those things, who's earned them.
Right. So when you write about these difficult topics, like you said, a brutal assault, how do you go about researching the mentality of a person who's been through something like that, assuming that you yourself have not, and I'm not asking. Um, but do you use sensitivity readers? Do you just sort of talk to people, research online? How do you
Yeah.
explore things like that?
It's Research is a huge part of my job and a part that I love. The eternal student in me loves the chance to learn something new. I always, from day one, talk to someone who has lived the career or experience that I'm focusing on. So if I write a doctor in the ER, like in my last book, Look on the Bright Side, I shadowed a doctor in the ER for a day,
Yeah.
and talked to him and, what he loved and hated about the healthcare system and how he treated his patients and stuff like that. Um, I wrote a book about adoption and I talked to birth mothers and I talked to adoptive mothers and I talked to adoptees, and because I really want to get those things right. And for that particular book, which was called Now That You Mention It, where there's the assault, I I was a rape crisis counselor for 12 years, and so I certainly had that kind of experience. I think every woman has been terrified at some point in their life that a man will hurt her. But I also read books about, I read The Gift of Fear, which is such an amazing book, and researched, not just reading articles, but talking to people. And I always say, I'm an author, I'm writing a book about this, and I would love to hear your firsthand experience, and it will be confidential and stuff. And people love to tell their stories. They love that you're interested in them, whether it's what's it like to be a soldier. I wrote a veteran hero once, and my husband works with a veteran of the Iraqi and Afghanistan wars, and he brought in this whole big box of stuff to show me, and we talked for like 2 hours, and I asked him questions like, how do you feel today? And he's like, well, fireworks scare me. And that went into the book.
Yeah.
Or how hot your rifle gets in the desert. You have to wear gloves. You can't touch your rifle with your bare hands. That went into the story. And, I think as writers, we're all kind of sponges. We love to soak up other people's experiences. I always say the writer's most important tool is to listen. And so, yeah, I researched a ton. And there was one book I wrote where the Twitterati felt that I had not struggled enough with my own weight to write a book about women who have struggled with weight. And so I listed my sources on my website, and they were like as long as my arm. And I felt very confident that I had done justice to the experience of people at different sizes. And I'm an American woman. I'm not a small person. I still can't shop at J. Crew without like breaking out of their shirts. The largest size at J. Crew doesn't fit me and never has. So I've experienced those kind of things of that, but I also know I took really great care and in getting the research right.
Yeah. So I don't know how to ask this exactly, but when you were talking about talking to adoptees and birth mothers, I had this reaction of like, oh God, like, oh, because I think I get very comfortable sitting in my little happy office here in my house with my dog and my cat, and it's quiet. And part of the attraction of being an author for so many of us is that we don't have to interact with lots and lots of people. And do you think that there is a comfortable way for someone who is inherently introverted to, like, how do you find a birth mother that
Yeah.
wants to chat with you?
Well, the first place I start is my smaller Facebook group. I was like, hey, I'm writing a book about a woman who put her child up for adoption. Um, does anyone want to share
That's
that
smart.
experience with me? And people do. They do
Yeah,
want to share their experiences. And I know I always say it'll be confidential. But I also, as a writer, I am at home in my pajamas 90% of the time. And so I'll go to Reddit or support groups, and I say, I don't want to intrude on this group for adoptees, but um, would you would you would like somebody post that I'm an author who wants to represent this experience fairly and in the full picture. And like I said, I had two women who host a podcast about adoption give me a lot of their personal information about what it's like to be adopted. And so most of it is done virtually and
okay.
anonymously. And on occasion, I get to sit down with the veteran or tag along with the doctor.
Yeah,
But there's groups out there for everybody,
there are.
and I love that, and I love that people are so willing to open themselves up. I think it's often easier to do online than in person.
Definitely. And I love the suggestion to start with your own reader group. That I don't know why that didn't occur to me, but there's, thousands of people there. They've all had vast experiences I know
Mhm.
nothing about.
Yeah,
Might as
yeah.
well ask. And I'm sure,
And I
most
think they feel like your readers feel so excited that like something that they say might help you because they're following you because they love your books.
sure.
And so if you say, whether it's like, would you like to pick the dogs, shoot the dogs for me? And yeah, or shoot the dogs,
I know.
post
I
the
don't think they
dogs,
want to shoot dogs.
no one's shooting
My
dogs.
readers don't.
um, or, did you ever like do something secretly terrible to your ex-spouse? That was a question people loved. People were dying to tell me, like, don't publish this, Kristan, but like, don't say it's me, but yes, I cleaned out the toilet with his toothbrush. you know and in my
So
character, this is in Out of the Clear Blue Sky. My character finds that her long and happy marriage isn't so happy. Her husband's been cheating on her, and he's very fastidious about um, his looks and his clothes, and he always wears a crisply ironed shirt to work, and she puts a little urine in the iron with the water, and so the water evaporates, but the urine kind of lingers. you know? And people were like, "Oh my god!" When she, puts her pee in the iron. How did you think of that? I'm like, I didn't. One
oh
of
my
my
god, someone
readers
did think.
gave me that as a gift.
Oh my god, that's awesome. You just reminded me a little bit off the track here, but I just finished watching last night. There's is it Netflix? I think so. Miniseries called Why Women Kill. My husband was very concerned that I
I
was
think I
watching
saw
something.
that. It's really funny, isn't it?
It's not, well, I mean, it's dark humor.
Yeah.
It's like it follows three couples that all live in the same
Yes, I
house
did
in
see
three
that.
different.
Yeah.
I thought it was fantastic, but the whole, happy marriage isn't so happy thing just made me
Yeah.
think of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, so we've talked a lot about the actual writing and we talked about social media. How do you, having had a good long couple decade career at this point, how do you keep yourself excited about writing the next thing? What do you
Yeah.
read? Craft books? Do you follow podcasts? Do you watch movies? What do you do?
That's such a good question. And I'll be honest, no one has ever asked me, Delancey. So kudos. That's never been a question that I've been asked. It can be really tough, and I the reason that I needed a little pause, I've still been writing this whole year, and soon my book will go out on submission. But the traditional publishing world can be really toxic and difficult, and it did kind of hurt my love of writing for a while. And I was still able to produce books that I loved and was proud of, but um, I was definitely losing the love and viewing my job as like so difficult and so almost painful. Um, and I hated that, because that's not, you don't write because, you hate writing, you write
Yeah.
because you're compelled to and because you love it. Um, so I took this year without a publisher to write my book, and I did really get the love back, the freedom of writing without a deadline, the freedom of writing without my editor's voice in my head, or thinking about the market and all that, not having to worry about like the last book I wrote and how blah blah blah. So
Yeah.
so I love stories. I'm always listening to a short story or an audiobook. I love television. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I hate when writers are like, oh no, I don't watch television. I only read. I'm like, really? You're missing out on so many great stories. It's
Well,
just
and
a
they're
different
so
format.
compacted. You can watch a story in an hour and go away being like, wow, that's a really great idea, and
Right.
then
And
build on it.
yeah, you learn so much because, shows are mostly dialogue and you learn so much. So, um, So yeah, I do have, some really close friends who are writers, and we go away to plot every year, and that's super fun. And I always leave like charged up to write my next novel.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that it's so important that we authors safeguard our writers' souls against the industry because, whether you're indie or trad, it's it's a tough way to make a living, and it's you're the only one who can do it. And, if you don't write a chapter, it's not like the substitute writer comes in and writes it for you.
Yeah.
So you have to really take care of yourself, emotionally and mentally. And sometimes that might mean like you don't get that book out on the deadline that you hoped, or that you leave a publisher or switch genres or something like that. But, you know, to have a long career, I think you really do have to safeguard against sort of the jackals barking at the door.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sort of along those lines, do you focus on, I mean, we sit and we write, right? Most people, unless you're creative and have one of those little walk pad things, which I have, it's leaned against the wall and has been for about a year. And my desk goes up and down, but it stays down and I sit. So, um, do you focus specifically on like, okay, I will get out and go for a walk every day, or I'm gonna run around with the dog, or do you focus on physicality as well?
I recently discovered I've always like had some kind of, physical activity. Um, I did boxing lessons. I used to run. I hated every stride, by the way.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I never got those endorphins. Forget that. It was
When I
misery.
had knee surgery, and he was like, the one thing I'm going to ask you is no more running. I was like,
It's
oh
like,
no,
"Oh,
okay.
I'm released from this hell."
Yeah, now I'm like, oh no, I can't run.
Yeah. So I do hot yoga now, which is really fun in this weird sadistic masochistic way. You're in a 97-degree room with steam coming down from the ceiling, and you're doing an hour of power yoga. But for whatever reason, I like it for
Yeah.
now, and I do that. But I'll tell you, I do not have a schedule. Um I don't say like, oh, it's 11 o'clock, it's time for me to sit down and write for 4 hours. And that's another thing, I guess, that I would say to my fellow writers listening to this podcast is there's no right way or wrong way to write. There's the way that works for you. And so I go days without writing, because I want to be a person too. I want to be a grandmother and a mother and a sister and a wife and a friend. And the way that works for me is that, there's usually a real crunch at the end where my story is just flowing and I try to make space to do a lot of writing. But in the, 6 months that led up to that, maybe not. Maybe I went for 2 weeks without working. And it's I wouldn't recommend my way, but it works for me.
And
So
when you do
I'm
that, do you have to go back and reread in order to kind of get back in the
yeah,
mindset? And
I do that whenever I start my writing day, or whatever, even if it's been a couple of weeks, I read what I last wrote
yeah,
and get back into the mood and say like, okay, so this narrator just had that chapter. Now it's time to switch. Or, I might leave a note to myself like, um, like what's the point of this chapter? How is this chapter supposed to end? Even if it needs 4 more pages before it's going to end.
yeah,
Um, and I'm really hard on myself, in a very positive way. I'm really hard on my books, and I think, like, oh, I've gotten to the point where I know this is just what I do. But at a certain point, I say, this book sucks. And I don't know why I picked this idea. It's horrible. Do I have time to start over with something new? I don't know how I'm going to make it work, but that's just part of my process. And I
does
think
it
that
always happen about the same point in each book that you
yes,
hit that? And what point is it?
it's like maybe 150 pages in. Like it's too much to just throw out and start
It's like
over, start something else.
40%, 30%, somewhere in there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like, ugh, I don't like I loved the last book I wrote. It was so much easier than that, but it wasn't. I'm just lying to
Wasn't.
myself. Um,
Yeah.
so I know now this is part of my process, the self-hatred and despair. And now I kind of embrace it because I think this is what's going to make me take a harder, deeper look at the book and really make it something that people will buy.
Yeah. Well, and once the hard part is over, that it gets easier and
Yeah.
that then you'll be done.
Yeah. I think of it as like sledding. I start at the bottom of the really steep hill, dragging the sled behind me, and I get all the way up to the top, and then I get to slide down the hill. So in the last month of my writing, I probably write 75,000 words.
Wow.
I can write very quickly. I can produce tons of pages when I have that, that wind behind me, when I've gotten to the top of the mountain and get to enjoy the ride down. That's where I am
Yeah.
right now. If you had interviewed me a few months ago, Delancey, you would have been like in the depths of my self-loathing and despair. So,
Kind of glad we missed that, although I am curious what that would look like. Yeah, I think that's a commonality. Everyone I talk to has a point that they always hit where they're like, "Why am I doing this? I'm not a
yeah,
writer. Why did I think I could write this book?"
right, right.
I think it's just part of the career.
It is,
It's
yeah.
nice to hear that you hit it too.
I think if there's an author who's like, oh, my books come to me in dreams and I write them in 2 weeks, I think, well, you're quite a unicorn or you're not telling the truth.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so one last question. I have two big picture questions, and they're both like things that people are usually like, I don't know. So you can answer whichever one you prefer. Um, Either, is there anything that you sort of see coming in the publishing industry that is exciting to you right now? Or um, what are your sort of general thoughts about everyone's worry over AI? And is it part of your process at all? Or are you just like, it will be whatever it will be, or either of those?
Um, I think that I'm not worried about AI. I I think it's inevitable. Stop worrying about it. It's going to happen,
Yes.
It's already happening. My books I know are used as source material. One of my friends was taking a course and she's like, "Oh my God, does Kristan know this?" So it's like, piracy in books. It's going to happen. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it. Control what you can control, which is your work. Um, I haven't used AI in helping me write. Um, I'm not I don't really know how it works. Um, I know like Chat GBT is, like, oh, give me 5 ideas for something that could happen on a girls' weekend.
Sure.
Sure, but I don't personally use it. I use my friends for that or my husband. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing, the big exciting thing in that's coming in publishing, I learned about at the NINC conference, and I think it could be really helpful to a lot of people. I don't see, again, like I have my way, and my way has worked, and I'm almost 60 years old, so like I'm probably looking at the last part of my career. But it's writer assistance, whether it's AI or a company that will write your first draft if you give them an outline and then you edit it, or they will I outline a book and you write it, that kind of thing. And so I was really interested to see that that was a thing, because I keep my head down and do my own thing, and I'm not out there exploring new ways to write, because again, my miserable, tortured, extended way of writing has worked for me.
Is I'm sorry, is writer assistance the name of a company or a
No,
tool, or just sort of a generalized like things
I
that
think
people
I
can
think it's a
use?
thing, and I think that there was a representative of a company who does that at NINC. Off the
Ah,
top of my head, I can't remember them, but
I'm missing that.
essentially like a writing partnership.
Yeah.
Say, like, I know James Patterson does this with his co-writers. He'll say, "Here's my idea," and you write a draft, and he edits it, and it's published by both of you.
And his name is big and yours is
His
little.
name is, but you know what?
But your name is next to his.
Apparently you get 50% of royalties. He's quite
Yeah,
generous. I actually know a person who co-wrote with him, and she said it was wonderful, and it supported my family for a year.
that's
So
great.
it's, I think it's that kind of thing, and it's just interesting. There will be authors who write a book with AI and then edit it. um Maybe that's great for you. you know um
Yeah.
but again, like I've always tried not to worry about the things I can't control, like sales or when your book is released or that kind of thing, because it's out there, and you did your best in the time that you had, and now you have a book to show for it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to leave off.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you. This was awesome.
You can find story writing tips, tricks, coaching, and courses at our site, www.evidentinc.com. Get live feedback in our writing community at Facebook at facebook.com/evidentinc, and find past episodes of Story Strategy at our YouTube channel. Story powers the world, and we can't wait to help you tell yours.